This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor. And we are in week 3 of our series for the future. And before we go any further, I just want to let you know that we have new content that drops every single week. So if you have not liked or subscribed to this podcast, make sure that you do so that way you don't miss out on any new content. Our For the Future series is interesting because it is part of a campaign that we are doing here at the church. And as I said, we are in week 3. So if you are jumping into this suddenly, you should probably go back and listen to the previous things. But week 1, you kind of gave us the why behind the initiative, why behind getting out of this debt that we are in. And then week 2, you talked about how we are made in the image of a generous God. So we are therefore generous as well. And then this week, we talked about, you spoke on the topic of how much should I give? Which is not a very clear-cut answer from what a lot of people probably, they probably want, you to just give them this straight across, here it is. But as you studied and as you spoke on Sunday, it's not just a clear-cut answer for everyone. And so a lot of people really like to go to the Old Testament and the idea of a tithe and 10%. But you shared a lot from Matthew 5 and how that kind of thinking is probably not correct. And so let's talk about Matthew chapter 5 and what that has to do with giving.
Yeah, so the way I set this up was to make the point, a lot of people have just been raised that they're supposed to give 10% of their income. Which, if that's how you were raised, if that's even what you believe, I don't think that's a bad thing. If you do it, I don't think anything bad's happening because people are choosing to give 10% of their income and try to honor God in that. I think that's a really, really good thing. But I wanted to set it up so we would understand Jesus's relationship to the law, mainly for this reason. Is in my experience, when people try to argue that the tithe or giving 10% is an Old Testament thing, it's not a New Testament thing, they do so simply to justify giving nothing. And I just want to tell those people, are you serious? You really think that's the application of your argument is that God is just oh, no. Yeah, you're totally fine. Don't contribute at all to the family of God. Don't contribute to this place that you say is so important to you, and you're do you think that's actually the application of it?
Right.
Oh yeah, no, the New Testament doesn't talk about tithing, so I'm not a regular giver. I'll give to special things whenever I feel led. It's no, come on. That's a silly application of that. If you think that that's a representation, and so what I was doing was in the Sermon on the Mount, I was showing how Jesus would state portions of the law or interpretations of the law, and then he would kind of in an authoritative way that no one else ever really taught, he would take it beyond that. So it wasn't just don't commit adultery. It was don't even look at people with lust in your heart. Don't treat them as objects. It wasn't just don't murder somebody. That's a pretty low bar to set. He's don't even get angry with people. Don't even call them idiots or fools or whatever translation you have. Don't even do that. Oh. Yes, of course, according to the law, you can get divorced for any and every reason, but how about if we go, unless there was adultery, and we know that there's a bigger conversation to happen there, but the point was, when you see the law, Jesus never loosened it up.
Right.
He always took it further, and then there's this passage, and I didn't add this into the sermon, I probably should have. This kind of answers the whole question of Jesus' relationship to the law and stuff. In Matthew 5, he says in verse 17, "Don't misunderstand what I have come. Why I come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purposes." Right? So the law was always supposed to be pointing towards something greater than itself. So that's why murder isn't the goal, but rather not having hate in your heart is actually the goal. Because God was trying to point us to his character deeper than just a set of rules. He says, I tell you the truth, not even until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest detail of God's law will disappear until its purpose is achieved. So again, when people go, oh, the tithe isn't in the New Testament, I go, that's technically true, but do you really think that Jesus is erasing your obligation as part of the family of God to contribute to it? That's a silly application. He goes, so if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you'll be called the least of the kingdom of heaven. So essentially he goes, yeah, those of you that are teaching that because tithing is not a part of the New Testament, that then you don't have to give anything.
Right.
No, that's not the application. But anyone who obeys God's law and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And this is the thing, this is the kind of the kicker. If you're like, still on the fence about whether or not, regular giving should be part of the life of the Christian since you're not under the law, Jesus goes, but I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So he goes, so unless something happens in you that's deeper than the law, then you don't actually have what it means to be part of the kingdom. And so this whole idea that, tithing is an Old Testament term, so I don't need to regularly support God's family, that's a ridiculous thing because God was calling us beyond the tithe to a place of generosity, beyond the letter of the law and more to the heart of the law. That's what he was calling us to. And so it's a ridiculous thing for me when people go, oh, tithing is not a New Testament thing. We don't have to do that. Oh, I'll give special offers. Oh, you're feeding hungry kids. I'll bring in some boxes of cereal for that. But you will attend a church and not help pay for the light bill? Are you serious? Are you kidding me? You attend a church that has 5 full-time pastors on staff because you want your kids to have people that are going to minister, or you want your kids to have a kids pastor. You want them when they get in teenagers to have a youth pastor. You want the music not to suck on Sundays, so you want a worship pastor. You want us to be doing good stuff in the community, so we have a discipleship and outreach pastor, and you don't want someone that doesn't know what they're talking about to be up there preaching every week, so we have a lead pastor. But you're not willing to fund those positions, but yet you demand them in your church. That's a ridiculous notion. Coming from what's supposed to be a selfless, generous heart, and you go, are you serious? We're getting ready to turn into the winter month. People don't even realize this. To keep the heat on in this place is about $36,000 a year. And you go, but I'm not called to tithe. I just give to special offerings. You're part of a family, bro. You are part of a family. That means that we have responsibilities. And the reason, though, why I take us away from this idea of the tithe, because Jesus was calling us beyond it, is because there's more to it than just this percentage amount. Because I don't think that Jesus is ever asking people to neglect taking care of their family at the expense of giving either. Right? So, there's these, two conflicting things. That's why, I pointed out, in that story from Luke 21, it's the proportion that's left, not the portion that's given, that matters the most. Because, here's what most people do: that they make a couple $100,000 a year, they give $10,000 to $15,000 a year, which is not a tithe off of their offer, but they give more than everyone else in the church,
right?
And so therefore they think that they're generous. You're living off $285 a year, brother. You're suffering from Jesus, aren't you? That's a ridiculous notion. That other people in the church are scraping together pennies and dimes to try to help out, and you're giving $15,000. That's a lot of money, but for you it ain't a lot of money. And that's what frustrates me. And then there are people that literally, I know, because of their station in life, if they were to give 10%, they would be out on their face. They would lose their homes. Their children would go without food. God's not calling them to that either. He's calling them to a heart of generosity. What is it that you can do, no matter how little or how big, in this season of life? Knowing that, because you were made in the image of a generous God, that your heart is to go well beyond the tithe. If that's your heart, God will eventually get you there. Get you to that ability to do that. But it irritates me when really wealthy people find themselves to be super generous just because they give more than a bunch of poor people. That's not generous whatsoever. And so that's why, like, Jesus, his relationship to the law calls us beyond it and calls us not to the letter of the law, but to the spirit of the law, which is generosity, which does not have a dollar amount or a percentage sign next to it. It's a condition of the heart.
Absolutely.
So I'm telling you, based on the story from Luke 21, you can give less than a penny with the right heart, and God is well pleased with that. And you can give tens of thousands of dollars, and if it's only a drop in the bucket for you, God is not pleased with that. And we have to change the dialogue to where the tithe is not the recliner that we sit in and prop our feet up. Oh, when we finally get to 10%, that's comfortable for some people.
Yeah.
That's comfortable.
I think
You're
it
not
goes back
teaching
to
people
that.
grow.
Yeah, to that what you said last week. If your level of giving doesn't require a certain amount of trust, then maybe you're not giving enough. Like that, I keep going back to that because I'm like, that's what it is for all of us. If the level that we're giving requires a certain amount of trust, then we know, like, that should be part of the goal, like, in the process. So for the wealthy person who's, only given out of their surplus, like, is that requiring trust? If that's easy and comfortable, then it's not requiring that trust. For the single mom who's, not at that 10%, that can't be at that 10%, like, for that single mom, whatever she's giving, it still requires a certain amount of trust for her to be able to do that. And so, like, knowing that, but then I even go back to, like, when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And he says all other laws fall under that. All other laws, including what you're supposed to give, right? And so, like, but part of us loving our neighbor and loving God is being generous to help them out. Like, it goes back to that why in the beginning of, like, listen, like, how much more can we do together? Like, if I try to give on my own to help feed families, I'm not going to do it. Like, I'm not going to be able to do that. But if, like, the amount that I can give along with the rest of the people here giving, I can make a much bigger difference. And so, like, out of my love for God and love for people, if I'm giving in the way that he's called me to, then we can do a whole lot more.
Like my family is not destitute.
Right.
But we are going without.
Yeah.
In a way that we don't, like, in a way that if it wasn't for our giving, we wouldn't have to. Like, that's just God's honest truth. Like, our life would be drastically different. Oh, we could be out cruising the world like everybody else in the church if we weren't committed to that. But I'm not, like, when I say that you should be given at a level of trust, I'm not saying that, like, you're making, like, bad financial decisions.
Right.
You're not like, hey, we're going to starve ourselves this week so we can give to the Lord. No, that's not what we're talking about. I'm just saying, like, my family, we have not had cable probably since we started giving to the church. That's just one of those things. We just have learned to go, do I got 2 or 3 different streaming things? Yeah, but those equal like $30 a month instead of $150 to $200. Right? Like, we go without.
Right.
We don't take all the trips that we would like to take. There are ways that we've had to cut back as a family because we're committed to giving. What we're going to be doing for the future is really going to cut into that. Right? But I also understand it's for a season. Right? It's for a season. But we're also, like, on the other, because there's a bad way to do this. On the other end of it, when you see me on vacation next year, don't be going, oh, he could be giving that to the church. Right. No, don't worry about what I'm giving to the church. Like, if you see me enjoying the blessings of God, it's only because I've already made sure that my giving has come first, and then I'm able to enjoy the blessing of God. That's what most people don't understand. Y'all try to enjoy the blessing of God first, and then give out of what's left. Megan and I, we're giving up front, and then, you know what? If I want to live in a certain house, I want to drive a certain car, I want to go on a trip, I want to go eat at a certain restaurant, I'm putting the Lord first in my finances, so therefore, he's blessing me to be able to do some of that stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. The problem is when you're trying to do all this first, trying to live it up first, and you go, all right, what do we have at the end of the month? All right, we've got $100. We can give $100. It's like, yeah, but you spent like $3,000 on yourself above and beyond your, like, you had plenty to give, but you gave out of what was left over, rather than why don't you take care of the Lord first
Yeah.
and then watch how he blesses. And yeah, you might have to go without some stuff. Right? My family goes without some stuff, but we also enjoy God's blessing when we're able to, because we don't have to have that guilt trip of like, oh man, the Malachi 6, like, I'm not robbing God because I'm putting him first, so therefore I can go and enjoy the blessing of God. I don't have to feel bad about the shoes that are on my feet or the clothes that are on my back or the car that I'm driving around. I don't have to feel bad about that because I'm giving to God. Yeah. Right? Because there's like a really unhealthy version of this where people are like, oh, no, if you got nice shoes, you've got more to give. If you you got money to go to Buffalo Wild Wings, you got money to give. It's like, no, that's ridiculous. That pounds people into the ground. Listen. Yeah. You can look throughout all the scriptures. God is 100% for you enjoying his blessing. That's why he's blessed you. He is also 100% for you being generous. And you got to find out the place where those two things meet. Yeah. And then you don't have to feel bad. You don't have to feel like, oh, you're robbing God. You're not doing your part. You don't have to catch a guilt trip every time you walk into the church because you're like, oh, I'm not doing. You don't have to whatsoever. And then you get to enjoy the blessing of God. It's the right way to do things. It works. Yeah. It works. And we talked about it last week. Whatever you sow will ultimately grow. And I'm telling you, generous people put themselves in the best position for God to actually bless them.
Yeah, I agree. Awesome. Well, you also talked about, we mentioned the widow a little bit there, but within the story of the widow, you talked about how different would we be in our giving if we imagine Jesus sitting there watching us, like hanging over our shoulder, watching us. And I imagine I know how that discussion went in our group last night, but I imagine that is something that, like, we tend to forget in everything that we do, that, like, God is all-knowing, and so, like, he does know. But I think that reminder is probably so important for some of us to just sit back and think, okay, Jesus is watching how I spend my money. Yeah. Like he really cares about it. And the reason is it's not about the money. He cares about you. That's why he cares about it. And I don't think he was watching these people for them to feel pressure whatsoever. I think it's just this picture of like, hey, listen, just include him in the process because he cares about you. Like, he will lead you to that place where you can enjoy his blessing and be generous. He will lead you there. But like, what I think most people probably do is they go, all right, what can we afford in our mind? What can we afford? Okay, that's what we're going to give. Yeah. Now, you may end up at the same answer. I'm not going to say that you're not going to. Yeah. But why not include God in the process? Yeah. You go, what if you sat down as a family and go, hey, God, what do you want us to give to your church regularly? Yeah. And then for this campaign, what do you want us to give over the next 3 years above and beyond? And, like, God will make that clear to you. He will make that clear to you, and then he will provide. We talked about this last week. All that you need to be generous. Yeah. He's the one that provides the seed and the harvest. He will provide whatever it is he lays on your heart. And he's not going to lead you to destitution. Like, this whole idea that you are just supposed to be broke and miserable because you're a Christian is a stupid, like poverty theology nonsense that has tried to combat like the prosperity gospel. And neither one of those is very helpful to the Christian whatsoever. Yeah, absolutely. I think that it was probably really freeing for a lot of people who have been struggling with what they are giving, like knowing that they're giving as much as they can, but still feeling like they're not measuring up, and knowing that Jesus is more interested in what's capturing your heart. I think that right there was probably very freeing for some people who have had that burden placed on them to reach a certain standard that they're not at yet. And then, also probably convicting to some people who maybe have been not giving at the level that they should. Yeah. But I think, when you went back to last week of the 2 Corinthians 9, 7, and just knowing like, hey, like, God doesn't want you to give out of coercion or guilt or that kind of thing, because we know that that's not going to last. And taking that time to really pray and look at things and discuss as a family is so important. And I loved what someone in my group talked about how they've invited their kid into it. I think that's so incredibly important through this process, because some of the things that you may choose to cut out, like you're thinking it's no big deal to you, but it might be a big deal to your kid. But even involving them in it to say like, hey, like, and sharing with them how it could end up like, hey, we might go without this for a little bit of time, but then in a few years we'll get it back, and like think of how much more cool things you'll be able to do as a church. Like, and inviting your whole family into the process, I think, is really cool and really important for this. You kind of gave us 3 big things, and you talked about Financial Peace University. Share real quick with people what that's about and why we believe that that's so important.
Financial Peace University gives you the tools to help you get yourself financially stable, so the way then you can actually be generous.
Yeah.
Because, again, you're made in the image of a generous God. You're already generous, but you may just not be in a place to do that. Right? Like, so, again, that also is not a place to just go like, well, I'm just doing what I can.
Yeah.
You know, faithfulness to God says, I will now that I'm aware that I'm called to something more, I now have to work towards that. So it's not, okay, your finances are a mess. I'm saying as of today that you got to give what you got to give.
Yeah.
But if your finances are a mess 5 years from now, that's not faithfulness.
Right.
That's not faithfulness whatsoever. If you have not been moving forward in your financial growth so the way you can be more generous, then you're not being faithful.
Yeah.
You know, you're staying at the same level.
Yeah.
It's just like the rich person that's not giving what they could. You're not either. That's because you're using all these bad decisions as a way to anchor you down. I think if all of us would just decide this is a journey that I'm going on. Like next year, I want to be more financially healthy than I am this year, so I can be more generous. And then another year, another year, another year. So if you're in that situation where you're not able to give generously yet, you're not in a situation where you're able to give what you really want to give, take steps to show God you're serious about this. Take steps to show that you do plan on being faithful. Even though you might not have it now, we will. We're going to get this figured out. But if you stay where you're at, that's every bit as unfaithful as the person that's not giving up to their giving potential on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And so you got to get yourself clear of that. It doesn't happen overnight. Right? Like your sin debt gets taken care of the moment that you ask Jesus to be Lord of your life, but your credit card debt does not.
Right.
You still got to go, and you got to go deal with that. You got to pay your student loans. You got to take care of them cars. Some of it may be you need to go trade your car in. You don't need to drive a Bentley. You need to drive, a Malibu or something. You need to go find you something cheaper.
Yeah.
That right there would do a wonder for people.
Yeah.
You don't need every single streaming service.
Yeah.
You just don't need it. I'm sorry, that's crazy.
No. And
if you got every one of them and you're using them to their full potential, you need a better prayer life. you need some friends or something. Like, I don't know, what are you doing with all of them streaming services?
Yeah.
You don't need that. Like there are very simple ways that Financial Peace University and even just talking to someone can help you. Like, listen, I'm all for, you want to get your nails done to feel pretty, get your nails done, right? But do you need to have it every 3 weeks? Do you need to be on the calendar every 3 weeks to get your nails done? Come on, right? Like, there's ways that like you can get yourself freed up without. Like, I'm not saying it's a no forever. It's a no for now because you got to get yourself out of this, and that's what Financial Peace helps you do. It helps you get everything on paper, so you can go, oh wow, I didn't realize I was spending $2,000 more than what I'm making every month.
Right.
That alone, that realization alone will help you go like, yep, we need to make some changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think a lot of people look at it as just as debt, but like we took it and we didn't have like credit card debt and stuff like that, but it helped us immensely with just being able to get the budget stuff down on paper to see where our money is going and then, figure out where we want it to go. I think and just talking through those things was so helpful. And I know a lot of people might see it. There is an upfront cost to it. However, like our coordinators are really great at helping you figure out the best way to get the things that you need initially to do it, but also like there are people who would like to sponsor people. So, but it's one of those things that sometimes an upfront investment into what we want to do is it will help us stick to it a lot better.
Yeah, that's
and
why
that's
if a gym membership was free, you'd never go.
Exactly.
You just wouldn't go.
Yeah, and so
or if it's too cheap, you won't go. That's why people have Planet Fitness memberships for 5 years and never show up. If it don't cost you something up front, there's not enough skin in the game, you won't work the process. So that's why, y'all, we can help, but you got to have some skin in the game, or else you'll go to that for 9 weeks and you won't do anything with it because you got a free ride on it anyways. You got some new information, but it's not going to drive you to change whatsoever. So I think that upfront cost is very important.
Yeah, I do too. And I know that we've both been through it, so we've done that. And I remember when I did, and I was like, oh, man, like thinking, I do not want to pay for this, but I knew I needed it, and it kept us, like, accountable to it, and it helped us stick with it and those things. But the other next steps are kind of the same as last week, to pray and decide to pray about your regular giving and also your giving for this campaign. Take the time, like we printed out statements from the last months. We took the time, we talked it through. Just take the time, talk it through, pray about it, and really see what God's leading you to. And then, man, I can't wait to see, because as you shared with us on Sunday, we already have basically a quarter of it committed already, and that's just staff and elders. And so I really am excited to see where God's going to take us throughout this. But we'll be here again next week. What can we expect for this next week?
I don't know.
I was going to say, I don't know where we're going.
I don't either. I've got some ideas.
Yeah.
We're in this. We talked about this in service planning last week. This feels weird, but there's some older sermons that I've done that I'm feeling like might just need revisited. One of them we're definitely doing. The other one is where I might be going this week, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So make sure you tune in so that way you don't miss out on what we are doing, because we don't even know yet. So I'm excited to see what God does, where he leads us throughout the rest of the series, and what he does in and through you. We'll see you back here again next week.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.